The chalice was already at my lips when the music stopped. I did not notice the silence at first. My throat was dry, my head was pounding from 3 hours of translating formal vampire speech into human diplomatic language, and the drink in front of me looked exactly like every other drink on that long crystal table. I lifted it. I swallowed. It tasted like something between wine and iron, warm in a way that should have warned me, and only when I lowered the cup did I understand that every single person in that enormous hall was staring at me. Not glancing, staring. Ambassador Denton Cole, standing 3 seats away, went the color of old paper. The vampire nobles around him rose from their chairs one by one, a slow wave of movement that felt more like a held breath than a reaction. And at the head of the table, on a raised black dais lit by hundreds of thin candles, the ruler of the Nixaran court turned her eyes toward me. Her name was Lyra Ashworth Vane, though nobody said her family name out loud in that room. She was the heir to a throne that had survived the death of a star, and she looked at me the way you might look at a fire that had just started in your own house. "Do you understand," she said quietly, in perfect human speech, "what you have just done?" I set the cup down carefully, the way you set down something that might be a bomb. "I was thirsty," I said. "I thought it was water." A vampire lord somewhere behind me made a sound that was half laugh, half horror. "That," Lyra said, "was the sovereign's cup. No one drinks from it unless they intend to be bound." "Bound to what?" "To me." I want to be honest about what went through my mind in that moment, because there is no version of this story where I come out looking clever. I thought she meant something political, some contract, some formal apology I would need to make in the morning. I did not understand, not yet, that I had just triggered a law older than my own species' recorded history, a law called the Right of the Broken Cup, and that in the eyes of every vampire in that hall, I was no longer a translator. I was a groom. My name is Callum Ferris. I came to the Nixaran court 11 months ago, as part of a small human delegation, assigned to Accord Station, a neutral outpost built between our territory and theirs, after decades of tension that had never quite become war, but had never quite become peace either. I was not chosen because I was brave or important. I was chosen because I could learn languages fast, and the vampires of Nixara spoke in layers. Formal court speech stacked on top of older ritual speech, stacked on top of something even older that only the eldest among them still understood. I liked the work. I liked the strangeness of it, the candlelit halls, the way vampire nobles moved like they were always half a second ahead of gravity. I did not at any point plan on marrying one of them. After the banquet, I was taken to a private chamber deep inside the palace, a room made of black stone and pale draped fabric, where an old vampire named Edric Vane stood waiting with a scroll in his hands. He was one of the council elders, and his face had the particular stillness of a man who has waited centuries for something interesting to happen, and was now deeply unhappy that it finally had. "The Right of the Broken Cup," he said, unrolling the scroll, "was written 800 years ago, after an assassin poisoned a sovereign through the ceremonial chalice. To prevent it happening again, the law was made simple. Whoever drinks from the sovereign's cup during a blood rite is claimed, not punished, not executed, claimed, bound to the throne by marriage, so that no outsider could strike at the sovereign without striking at their own spouse first. I didn't drink it on purpose. The law does not ask about purpose," Edric said. "It never has. That was the point of it. Intention can be faked. A cup cannot. So undo it. Tell everyone it was a mistake." Edric looked at me the way you might look at a child asking why gravity couldn't simply take the day off. "The law has no clause for mistakes," he said. "Only for death, or for a formal challenge fought and won. You are bound to her, Callum Ferris, until one of those two things happens." I laughed. I actually laughed, standing there in that stone room, because it felt like the only sane response to being told I was suddenly engaged to the future ruler of an entire vampire nation because I had been thirsty at the wrong table. Lyra did not find it funny. I saw her again the next morning in a smaller hall, one without an audience, and she looked exactly as furious as I expected, though something in her expression was harder to name. She was tall, sharp-featured, with dark hair pulled back in a style that looked more practical than decorative, and she watched me the way a soldier watches an unfamiliar weapon, unsure yet whether it will help her or blow up in her hand. "You have humiliated me," she said. "I didn't mean to. That is worse." She began pacing, her boots silent on the stone floor. "Do you understand what my council will say? That the future sovereign of Nixara was claimed, in front of the entire court, by a human who cannot even read a wine label. To be fair, your cups don't have labels." She stopped and stared at me, and for one dangerous second I thought I had made things worse. Then something flickered at the corner of her mouth, gone so fast I almost missed it. "You are either very brave or very stupid," she said. "People tell me it's usually both." She did not laugh, but she also did not have me removed from the room, which by that point felt like a small victory. Over the following days, the news spread through both the vampire court and the human station like fire through dry grass. Ambassador Cole called me into his office, and I have never seen a diplomat look so close to fainting. "This is a disaster," he said. "Do you understand the position this puts us in? If we ask them to break the law, we insult their entire legal tradition. If we let it stand, we've just handed the vampire throne a human hostage they can use however they like. I'm not a hostage. You're a symbol, Callum, and symbols get used." He rubbed his eyes. "Command wants you extracted, quietly, tonight, if possible." "And what happens to her if I disappear?" He hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything. "The law states both parties share the binding," he admitted. "If you vanish, she is considered to have broken faith with the throne's oldest tradition. Some of the council would call that treason. She could be stripped of her right to rule, possibly worse." I sat with that for a long moment. I had known Lyra for exactly 2 days as anything other than a name I translated speeches for, and already my leaving quietly might destroy her. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, surprising myself as much as him. Cole stared at me like I had grown a second head. "Do you even understand what you're agreeing to?" Honestly, I did not, but I understood enough to know that running would not undo the mistake. It would only make someone else pay for it. The vampire court, I quickly learned, was not one single mind agreeing on how furious to be. There were factions, old bloodlines with old grudges, and my accidental engagement had cracked the surface of a rivalry that had clearly been simmering long before I arrived. The council elders, led by a cold, precise vampire named Corvin Marsh, saw the law as sacred beyond question. To them, the right had spoken, and the right would be obeyed to the letter, humiliating or not. Corvin did not like me, but he liked the idea of breaking 800-year-old law even less. Others were not so patient. A younger noble named Adrian Wolfe made it clear, in the calm and pleasant tone vampires used for their worst threats, that she intended to see me removed from the picture entirely, one way or another, and that a formal challenge would be the cleanest method. "You would fight me?" I asked her once, in a corridor lit by pale blue lanterns. "I would fight for the throne," she said. "You are simply standing in front of it." I did not sleep well after that conversation. What surprised me, over the following weeks, was not the vampire court's hostility. I had expected that. What surprised me was Lyra. She began seeking me out, not out of affection, not at first, but out of what I slowly understood was pure necessity. If she was going to be bound to me whether she liked it or not, she needed to know what kind of weapon or liability she had been handed. We talked in gardens grown under artificial starlight, in libraries filled with texts older than my entire species' written history, in quiet halls where no council member could overhear. I told her about human customs, about how we married for love as often as for politics, about how strange it felt to be engaged to someone whose age I genuinely could not guess. She told me about the court's history in pieces, careful and guarded at first, then slowly less so, about the dying star her ancestors had fled centuries ago, about the long journey through dark space in ships, built from technology and something older, something biological, something that let her people survive by drinking blood, the way humans survived by breathing air, about the weight of ruling a nation that had lost its original home and had to build a new one from nothing but tradition and stubbornness. "You never asked to rule," I said one evening, watching false stars flicker above the garden dome. No one asks, she said. You are simply born into it, and then you spend your whole life deciding whether to resent that or accept it. Which did you choose? She was quiet for a long moment. I am still deciding. I found, against every expectation I had walked into that court with, that I liked her. Not the idea of her, not the political weight she carried, but her. The way she argued with old texts like they had personally offended her. The dry humor she hid behind centuries of formal manners. The way she never once asked me to pretend I was less afraid than I actually was. The council, unfortunately, did not care how well we got along. 3 weeks after the banquet, Adrian Wolfe formally invoked the right of challenge, an old law that allowed any noble of sufficient rank to contest a binding through combat. If she defeated me, the marriage would be dissolved, cleanly, without anyone having to admit the original law had ever been a mistake. I was, by any measure, going to lose that fight. Adrian had lived for centuries. I had lived for 29 years and spent most of them reading books instead of training with weapons. Edric Vane found me the night before the challenge, sitting alone in the palace library, surrounded by more ancient scrolls than I had any real hope of finishing. You cannot win a physical contest against her, he said bluntly. Everyone knows this, including Adrian. Then why fight at all? Because the law allows for another kind of challenge, he said, and something in his voice had changed, careful and almost hopeful. A challenge of knowledge. It has not been used in 400 years, but it exists. If you can prove greater understanding of the right than your challenger, the council must recognize your victory, the same as if you had won by combat. I stared at him. You're telling me I can win this by being a nerd? He did not understand the word, but he nodded anyway. I am telling you that the law was never truly about violence. It was about proving worth. Combat is simply the version most vampires prefer. I spent that entire night reading, faster than I had ever read in my life, digging through the oldest texts in that library, texts written in the layered court language I had spent 11 months learning. And somewhere near dawn, exhausted, eyes burning, I found something that made me sit completely still. The right of the broken cup had not been written as a punishment. It had been written as a peace mechanism. 800 years ago, after the assassination attempt, the sovereign of that time had not simply wanted revenge against future poisoners. She had wanted to end the cycle of outsiders being treated as threats to be destroyed on sight. The law forced connection instead of execution. It forced the throne and the outsider into partnership rather than conflict, because a bound spouse could not easily be dismissed as an enemy. It was, at its core, an old and clumsy attempt at building trust between people who had every reason to distrust each other. No modern vampire, not even the council elders, remembered that original purpose. Over centuries, the law had calcified into tradition without meaning. A rule followed because it had always been followed. I brought this to the challenge the next day, in a hall packed with nobles from every faction. Adrian standing across from me in formal combat dress that made it clear she had expected an entirely different kind of fight. You misunderstand the right, I said, my voice shaking slightly despite every effort to steady it. You treat it as a punishment for outsiders, but it was written by your own sovereign as protection against a future where your people trusted no one beyond your own kind. It was written so that the throne would never again be isolated from the world around it. Corvin Marsh, seated among the council, narrowed his eyes but said nothing. If you kill me today, I continued, looking directly at Adrian, you are not defending the law. You are breaking the very thing it was built to protect. The hall was silent for a long moment. Then Lyra rose from her seat on the dais, and every eye in the room turned to her instead of me. He is correct, she said. I have read those same texts. I did not understand them until now, but he is correct. She looked at Adrian with something cold and final in her expression. The challenge is refused, not on grounds of combat, but on grounds of truth. He has proven greater understanding of the right than you have, and by the law's own words, that is victory enough. Adrian did not look pleased, but even she could not argue with law written in her own people's ancient hand. I do not think I fully understood, standing in that hall with my heart pounding and my hands shaking, that I had just changed something much larger than my own situation. Word of the challenge spread fast, not just through the vampire court, but across the human station as well. Ambassador Cole, who had spent weeks trying to find a quiet way to remove me, called me into his office again, this time with an entirely different expression on his face. "Command is calling it a diplomatic breakthrough," he said, sounding almost dazed. "They want to use the wedding as a formal peace gesture between our two peoples." "They want to use it," I repeated. "Everyone wants to use it, Callum. That's what symbols are for." He studied me for a moment. "Do you actually want this? Not the politics. Her." I thought about the gardens under fake starlight, the dry humor hidden behind centuries of formality, the way she never once asked me to be someone I wasn't. "Yes," I said, and I was surprised by how easily the word came out. The wedding itself happened 2 months later, in the same hall where the entire mess had begun, though this time, every cup on every table was clearly, deliberately, unmistakably labeled, a small joke that made even Corvin Marsh's mouth twitch. Lyra wore black and deep red, court colors that had marked her family line for centuries. I wore the closest thing my own culture had to formal dress, and felt entirely out of place standing beside centuries of vampire tradition, which by that point had become a fairly familiar feeling. Edric Vane presided over the ceremony, reading from the same old scroll he had shown me on that very first night, though his voice now carried something warmer than the cold formality I remembered. "The rite of the broken cup," he said, "was written not to punish, but to bind two worlds together through trust rather than fear. Tonight, for the first time in 800 years, that original purpose is fulfilled, not by accident, but by choice." I looked at Lyra, and she looked back at me, and for once there was no politics in her expression at all. "You could have refused all this," I said quietly, "just for her. Once the challenge was won, you could have ended the binding. No one would have blamed you." "I know," she said. "Why didn't you?" She was quiet for a moment, the candlelight catching the sharp lines of her face. "Because for the first time in my life," she said, "someone looked at this throne and did not see something to fear or something to use. You saw a mistake worth fixing honestly, instead of a problem worth escaping quietly. That is rarer in my world than you understand." Outside the hall, I later learned, both human and vampire delegations were already drafting the first real treaty in decades, built on nothing more solid than an accident with a cup and two people who had chosen, against every expectation, not to run from what that accident had created. I did not come to the Nixaran court looking for any of this. I came to translate words between two peoples who barely trusted each other. I never expected to become the bridge between them myself, bound not by the law that started it, but by the choice that followed it. Some laws are written to punish mistakes. This one, it turned out, was written to survive them. And somewhere in that survival, quietly, without any grand declaration, I had stopped being a groom by accident. I had become one by choice.